The Montana Territory stretched endless and unforgiving beneath the October sky of 1886. Dust devils danced across the barren plains, and the Bitterroot Mountains loomed like ancient sentinels against the horizon. In this land where silence weighed heavier than words, Jed Carter had carved out his existence a small ranch nestled in a valley where the wind sang lonely songs through the sagebrush. Jed stood on his porch, weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. At 38, he wore his solitude like a second skin. The morning sun cast long shadows across his property, 40 head of cattle, a modest cabin built with his own hands, and memories that haunted the empty spaces between fence posts. He unfolded the letter again, though he'd memorized its contents days ago. The Eastern Employment Agency had responded to his inquiry with practiced efficiency. A widow of good character and domestic skills will arrive via the territorial stage on October 15th. Mrs. Clara Dawson comes highly recommended for her cooking and household management. Simple enough. He needed someone to tend the house while he worked the ranch. Someone quiet, efficient, who wouldn't disturb the careful balance of his days. The war had taught him the value of routine, and the years since had only reinforced that lesson. His fingers traced the scar along his jaw, a Confederate saber's parting gift at Antietam. Some wounds healed cleaner than others. The stage was due at noon. Jed had already made the 2-hour ride to Hollow Ridge, the nearest excuse for a town. Now he waited outside Morrison's general store, watching the road that snaked through the valley like a dusty river. Other men might have cleaned up special for the occasion, but Jed wore his usual canvas pants and faded blue shirt. No sense pretending to be something he wasn't. Expecting company. Carter. Samuel Morrison emerged from his store, wiping his hands on his apron. The shopkeeper's perpetual smile made Jed uncomfortable, like sunshine on a wound. "Hired help?" Jed replied, not inviting further conversation. "About time. That ranch of yours needs a woman's touch." Morrison's grin widened. "Martha's been saying, 'Stage is coming.'" Indeed. A cloud of dust announced the arrival before the coach itself appeared. The 6-horse team thundered into view, the driver fighting to control animals eager for rest and water. The stage rolled to a stop in a cacophony of creaking leather and snorting horses. Jed stepped forward as the door opened. He expected a matronly woman, perhaps weathered by prairie life, certainly past the bloom of youth. What he saw made him take an involuntary step back. Clara Dawson couldn't have been more than 25. She emerged from the coach with a grace that seemed at odds with her dust-covered traveling dress. Not beautiful in the conventional sense, her features were too strong for that, her jaw too determined, but there was something in the way she held herself, spine straight despite what must have been days of bone-jarring travel, that spoke of steel beneath the calico. Her eyes found his immediately, gray, like winter storms over the mountains. They assessed him with the same directness he'd used to size up wild horses, neither friendly nor hostile, just measuring. "Mr. Carter." Her voice carried a hint of Eastern refinement worn down by harder times. He nodded, reaching for her carpet bag. Their fingers brushed as she handed it over, and he noticed the calluses on her palms. Not a pampered city woman, then... "Good. Long journey," he offered. "I've had longer." She didn't elaborate, turning instead to retrieve a small trunk from the coach's boot. When she lifted it herself before he could help, he caught a glimpse of faded bruises on her wrist, mostly healed but still visible to someone who knew what violence looked like. The thought whispered through his mind unbidden, lonely cowboy wanted only a quiet ranch cook, but she came and stirred his silent desires. He pushed it away, irritated. Desires had no place in this arrangement. "Wagons this way," he said, leading her to his humble conveyance. She climbed up without assistance, arranging her skirts with practiced efficiency. As they pulled away from town, Morrison's voice carried after them, "Welcome to Hollow Ridge, Mrs. Dawson." She didn't turn, but Jed saw her shoulders tense. The ride to the ranch passed mostly in silence. Jed wasn't one for small talk on his best days, and Clara seemed content to watch the landscape roll by. Only once did she speak, when they crested the hill overlooking his property. "It's smaller than I expected." "It's sufficient," he replied, unsure if she meant it as criticism. "Good. Large houses echo too much." It was an odd thing to say, but Jed didn't pursue it. He'd hired her to cook and clean, not to share confidences. The cabin looked even more austere than usual as they approached. Single story. 3 rooms. Built for function rather than comfort. The barn stood larger than the house itself, because cattle mattered more than creature comforts in this country. Clara climbed down and surveyed her new home with those storm-gray eyes. "Show me the kitchen." Inside, she moved through the space like she was mapping territory. Her fingers trailed over the cast-iron stove, the scarred wooden table, the meager collection of pots and dishes. The main room served triple duty as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room. A closed door led to what would be her small bedroom. His own was on the opposite side, with the thick log walls between them. The stove draws poorly when the wind's from the east. He said, "Pumps out back, but it freezes come December. Have to haul water from the creek then." She nodded, already pulling items from her trunk: an apron, worn but clean, a wooden spoon, smooth from use, a small cloth bag that released the scent of herbs when she set it on the shelf. "Supper's at 6, she asked, tying the apron around her waist. "Thereabouts. Preference things you won't eat. I eat what's put in front of me." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "That makes things easier. I'll need supplies from town. Make a list." He pointed to a pencil and paper near the window. "Morrison extends credit. Within reason." "I'm good with reason. Mr. Carter." She was already moving, filling a pot with water, checking the fire in the stove. Jed found himself dismissed in his own home. It should have irritated him. Instead, he stepped onto the porch and breathed deep. The air smelled of sage and distant rain. Normal things. Inside, he heard Clara moving about. The clatter of pans, the scrape of a chair. Sounds that had been absent for too long. He'd lived with silence for 5 years. Since Mary and little James had succumbed to the fever, the quiet had become a companion, reliable as sunrise. Now this woman with her storm-gray eyes and hidden bruises was filling his space with noise and purpose. He'd asked for a cook, nothing more. As the sun tracked across the sky, Jed went about his chores, checking the cattle, mending a section of fence, hauling feed to the horses, familiar work that freed his mind to wander where it shouldn't, to wonder what had put those bruises on her wrist, to remember the determined set of her jaw as she'd climbed into his wagon. When he returned as evening painted the sky purple and gold, smoke rose from the chimney and the smell of fresh bread drifted across the yard. He paused at the door, suddenly uncertain. For 5 years, coming home had meant cold rooms and colder silence. "Wash up," Clara called from inside. "Supper's ready." The table bore a simple meal beans seasoned with salt pork, fresh bread still warm from the oven, coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of boiled dirt. She'd even found his mother's old tablecloth, hidden away in a trunk he hadn't opened in years. Clara sat across from him, eating with quiet efficiency. The lamplight softened the angles of her face but couldn't hide the wariness in her eyes, like a horse that had been handled rough and learned to expect the worst. "It's good," he said, meaning the food but somehow encompassing more. "Thank you." They finished the meal in silence, but it was a different quality of quiet than he was used to, fuller somehow. When she rose to clear the dishes, he almost offered to help. Almost. "I'll need wood for the morning," she said, "and if you have any mending, leave it out. I noticed your shirt." She gestured to a tear he'd forgotten about. "I manage fine." "I'm sure you do, but managing and living aren't the same thing." Before he could parse that statement, she'd retreated to the kitchen area. Jed escaped to the porch, rolling a cigarette with hands that weren't quite steady. The stars emerged one by one, mapping out the vast Montana sky. Behind him, Clara worked by lamplight. He could see her shadow moving against the windows. Domestic, ordinary, everything he'd wanted when he'd written to that agency. So why did he feel like a storm was building on the horizon, invisible but inevitable as tomorrow's sunrise? When he finally retired, she was still up, a small figure bent over something in her lap. Sewing, maybe, or writing a letter to whoever she'd left behind. Everyone out here had left someone behind. Jed lay in his narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his house. A chair creaking. Footsteps, lighter than his own. The soft splash of water in a basin, then, finally, silence as she too sought sleep. But rest wouldn't come. His mind kept circling back to that moment at the stage, when she'd emerged into the dusty afternoon light. He'd wanted quiet help. Instead, he'd gotten Clara Dawson, with her mysteries and her bruises and her way of making his empty house feel both fuller and smaller at the same time. Asterisk lonely cowboy wanted only a quiet ranch cook asterisk. He thought again. The rest of it about desire stirred and silences broken. He pushed down deep where such foolishness belonged. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Cattle to tend, fences to mend. The endless work of keeping a small ranch afloat in unforgiving country. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, Jed Carter fell asleep to the sound of another person breathing in his house. It was, he told himself, exactly what he'd wanted. Nothing more. The first week tested them both like wolves circling in the dark, wary and watchful. Clara rose before dawn, moving through the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone used to avoiding notice. By the time Jed emerged, coffee steamed on the stove and biscuits waited under a clean cloth. She worked without fuss, but her presence filled every corner of the small cabin, the scent of lye soap, the neat stack of folded laundry, the windows actually clean enough to see through. "You don't need to work yourself raw," Jed said on the third morning, finding her scrubbing the porch boards in the pre-dawn darkness. She didn't look up. "I'm earning my keep, Mr. Carter, nothing more." "It's just Jed. The Mr. makes me look for my father." "Your father's passed." 10 years now, ranched up near Fort Benton before the Blackfeet troubles. She sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Mine died when I was 12. Timber accident in Pennsylvania." The words came out matter-of-fact, like discussing the weather. Jed shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy of shared loss. "I'll be checking the north pasture today. Be back by supper. There's cold beef and yesterday's bread for noon. Water, too." He found the bundle waiting by his saddle, wrapped neat in brown paper. Such small considerations. Yet they knocked him off balance. Mary had done similar things, but that was different. That was love. This was just arrangement. The days fell into rhythm. He worked the ranch. She transformed the cabin from a place to sleep into something resembling a home. But beneath the routine ran an undercurrent of tension, like a river running beneath ice. It came to a head over a shirt. Jed returned late one evening to find his work clothes mended, washed, and folded on his bed. The shirt he'd torn on barbed wire had been patched so carefully the repair was nearly invisible. But beside it lay another shirt, one he hadn't worn in 5 years. Mary's favorite, the one she'd made him for their last Christmas together. He stormed into the kitchen where Clara kneaded bread dough. "You went through my things." She didn't flinch at his tone. "I cleaned. That's what you hired me for?" "Not that trunk. That was—" He stopped, unable to finish. "Private. I understand." She kept working the dough, her movements steady. "But moths don't respect privacy. Mr. Carter, neither does mildew. Your memories won't be served by letting them rot." "You don't know anything about my memories." Now she did look up, and the directness of her gaze hit him like cold water. "I know enough. I know you eat like a man doing penance, sleep like you're afraid of dreams. Keep that trunk locked like it holds your whole heart inside." She turned back to her bread. "I'm not judging, just observing. Maybe observe less and cook more. Maybe ask for what you actually want instead of expecting people to read your mind." The words hung between them like a challenge. Jed's hands clenched at his sides. Part of him wanted to fire her on the spot. Another part, a part he didn't want to examine, admired the steel in her spine. "Supper's in an hour," she said, dismissing him in his own home. He retreated to the barn, spending longer than necessary tending the horses. When he finally returned, she'd set the table for two as always. The meal passed in strained silence until she spoke. "My husband liked his shirt starched stiff enough to stand alone." Her voice was carefully neutral. "Said it made him look prosperous. I spent half my time washing and starching and ironing shirts that looked like armor." She took a sip of coffee. "Yours were soft, well worn, like they'd been loved into comfort." Jed set down his fork. "My wife made most of them." She had skilled hands. She had everything. The words escaped before he could stop them. "Fever took her and our boy, summer of '81. Clara nodded slowly. "Mine didn't die. I left him." She said it like admitting to theft. "That's worse, isn't it, at least in the eyes of God and law?" "Depends on why you left." Her hand moved unconsciously to her ribs, a protective gesture he recognized. "Some men think a wedding ring gives them rights to things that shouldn't be given." She met his eyes. I disagreed, forcefully, with a fireplace poker. Jed felt something shift in his chest. Not pity, she'd hate that, but understanding. "Is he looking for you?" "I doubt it. His new wife is younger and quieter. 17 and grateful. Poor thing." Bitterness colored her words. "I'm sure he's convinced her that bruises are just love getting carried away." "They're not." "No, they're not." She stood abruptly, beginning to clear dishes. "I apologize for the shirt. It won't happen again." "Clara." Her name felt strange on his tongue. "The shirt is... it's fine. Just ask next time." She paused, hands full of plates. "And you'll do the same. Ask for what you need instead of brooding like a thundercloud." Despite himself, Jed felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "You always this forthright with employers. Only the ones who look like they're carrying the whole world on their shoulders." She moved to the wash basin. "Gets heavy after a while, doesn't it?" The question followed him to bed that night. Yes, it was heavy. The loneliness, the memories, the weight of surviving when others hadn't. But admitting that felt like weakness. And weakness killed men out here faster than bullets. Over the following days, something eased between them. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual recognition. Two damaged people sharing space, careful not to bump each other's bruises. Clara proved herself capable beyond cooking and cleaning. When a calf got tangled in wire, she helped free it without being asked. When Jed came back, rain-soaked and shivering from an unexpected storm, she had hot coffee and dry clothes waiting. No questions about why he'd stayed out so long. "You know ranching," he observed one evening, watching her expertly stitch a tear in a saddle blanket. "I know animals. Grew up on a dairy farm before my father died. Cows are cows, whether you're milking them or herding them. Your husband didn't ranch." "Ethan," she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He sold insurance in Chicago, thought ranching was beneath him, thought most honest work was beneath him. Truth be told." "How'd you end up out here?" Her needle paused. "A widow needs work. Agencies don't ask too many questions if you're heading far enough west." She looked at him. "How'd you end up placing that advertisement?" Jed shifted in his chair. "Got tired of burned beans in my own company." Which was worse? Close call some days. She actually smiled at that. Just a quick flash before returning to her sewing. But it transformed her face. hinting at who she might have been before life got its hands on her. That night, he lay awake thinking about that smile, about the way she'd moved through his house like she was still expecting someone to yell at her for taking up space, about how she'd helped with the calf, gentle but unafraid. Asterisk. She came and stirred his silent desires. No. He pushed the thought away. He'd hired a cook. The fact that she had a spine like forged iron and eyes that saw too much that was inconvenient. Nothing more. He didn't have room for complications. Neither did she, from the sound of it. But the next morning, when she handed him his coffee and their fingers brushed, he didn't pull away quite as fast. And when she asked if he'd like something special for Sunday dinner, he found himself telling her about the roast venison his mother used to make. "I could try," she offered, "if you show me where to find wild rosemary. I noticed some growing by the creek, but I wasn't sure if it was the right kind." That afternoon, against his better judgment, he took her to the creek, showed her the rosemary, the wild onions, the mushrooms that were good eating and the ones that weren't. She listened with the focus of someone storing up knowledge for lean times. My wife knew all this. He found himself saying, her mother was half Crow, taught her how to read the land. Smart woman. The smartest? He picked a sprig of rosemary, inhaling its sharp scent. "I used to think I'd teach our boy. Pass it along like she passed it to me." "Knowledge doesn't die with the student," Clara said quietly. "Just waits for the next willing learner." He looked at her, kneeling by the creek bank, skirts muddy and face turned up to catch the late afternoon sun. Something twisted in his chest. Not pain this time, but possibility. Dangerous as spring ice on a river. "We should head back," he said roughly. "Storm coming in." She followed, without argument. But he caught her looking at him sideways, like she was reading sign he didn't know he was leaving. That evening, as promised, rain lashed the windows. She served venison that tasted almost like memory. They ate in companionable silence while the storm raged outside, making the cabin feel smaller and warmer. "Thank you," he said when he'd cleaned his plate. "For the meal. For the effort. For..." He struggled with words. "For making this place feel less empty." She studied him across the table. "Empty's not the worst thing to feel. Sometimes it's safer than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" "Hope," she said simply. "Hope hurts worse than emptiness when it gets taken away." Jed had no answer for that truth. They sat listening to the rain until she rose to clear the dishes. This time, he helped. They worked side by side in the small kitchen, careful not to touch, careful not to acknowledge how natural it felt. Later, as they settled by the fire, him with a harness to mend, her with the endless mending, Clara spoke again. "I'm not looking for complications. Jed, need you to know that I came here for quiet work and a roof that doesn't leak. Nothing more." "Good. That's all I'm offering." "Good," she echoed. But when their eyes met across the firelit room, something passed between them that made liars of them both. The storm outside seemed a whisper of changes coming, of walls built carefully starting to crack. Still, they kept their distance, professional, proper, two people sharing space and nothing more. If their awareness of each other grew sharper each day, if the silences became loaded with unspoken words, well, that was nobody's business but their own. The first week had tested them. The second week was teaching them a harder lesson that sometimes what you want and what you need are different things entirely. And sometimes a quiet ranch cook can stir more than just desires. She can stir a heart back to life, whether it wants to beat again or not. Winter crept into the valley like a cautious predator, frost painting the morning grass silver and turning breath into small clouds. 2 months had passed since Clara stepped off that stage, and the ranch had settled into rhythms as natural as heartbeat. Jed found himself looking forward to the small domesticities that marked their days. The lamp already lit when he came in from evening chores. The way Clara hummed soft and absent-minded while she worked. How she'd taken to leaving a cup of coffee on the porch rail when she heard him in the barn. still steaming in the cold morning air. "You're spoiling me," he said one morning, warming his hands on the cup. "Hardly. You're easier to live with when you're not growling about cold coffee." She didn't look up from the eggs she was scrambling. Besides, waste of good beans to let it sit. He'd learned her patterns too. How she rubbed her left shoulder when rain was coming, an old injury that ached with weather changes. The way she counted money twice, like someone who'd learned the hard way that every penny mattered. How she still startled when he came in too quiet, though she tried to hide it. They'd developed an unspoken language of consideration. He'd started knocking on the door frame even when entering his own house. She'd stopped apologizing for taking up space, though she still ate like someone might snatch her plate away. The change came gradual as snow melt, little things that might mean nothing or everything. Like the afternoon he found her struggling to move the heavy wash basin. He took it from her without asking, their hands touching in the transfer. Instead of pulling away, she let her fingers rest against his for just a moment. "Thank you," she said softly. "What else am I good for?" He meant it light, but it came out wrong, too much truth in it. She studied him with those storm-gray eyes. "More than you think." Or the evening a wolf spooked the horses. Clara grabbed the rifle by the door and followed him out without hesitation. They stood together in the moonlight, watching the darkness beyond the fence line, her shoulder brushing his arm. "Can you shoot?" he asked. "Well enough to discourage company." "That how you discouraged your husband?" "Fireplace poker." She reminded him. The rifle would have been too quick. He found himself almost smiling. "Remind me not to cross you." "You haven't yet. I'd like to keep it that way." When the wolf didn't return, they went inside. But something had shifted in those moments of standing together against the dark. It was full winter when the fever hit. Jed woke shivering despite the sweat soaking his sheets. He tried to rise, managed 3 steps before the world tilted sideways. The crash brought Clara running. "Stubborn fool," she muttered, helping him back to bed. Her hand on his forehead was cool and steady. "Burning up. How long have you been feeling poorly?" "I'm fine," he managed through chattering teeth. "Sure you are. That's why you're shaking like a leaf and hot as a stove." She pulled quilts over him. "Stay put. Move from this bed and I'll tie you to it." The next days blurred together, Clara tending him with competent hands and gentle efficiency, spooning broth between his cracked lips, cooling his fever with wet cloths, sitting beside his bed through the worst nights when delirium took him and he called for Mary, for his boy, for fellow soldiers 20 years dead. He surfaced to find her asleep in the chair beside his bed, one hand resting on his arm like an anchor. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her hair had come loose from its usual neat bun, falling around her face in waves. "Clara," his voice came out rusty. She jerked awake instantly. "You're back." The relief in her voice made his chest tight. "Fever broke yesterday, but you've been sleeping like the dead. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by cattle." "Good. That means you'll live." But her hand tightened on his arm. "You scared me. Jed Carter." "It takes more than fever to kill an old soldier." "Old soldiers die just as easy as young ones when they're too stubborn to admit they're sick." She stood, businesslike again. "I'll get you some broth. And don't even think about getting up. The ranch won't fall apart without you for a few days." But when she brought the broth, he caught her hand. "Thank you." "It's what you hired me for." "No, it's not." He held her gaze. "We both know it's not." Something flickered in her eyes, fear, maybe, or hope. Same thing sometimes. "Drink your broth before it gets cold." Recovery came slow. Clara wouldn't let him do more than sit by the fire, and even that exhausted him. She managed the essential chores, feeding stock, breaking ice on water troughs, keeping the fires going. When he protested, she fixed him with a look that would have backed down a grizzly. "I grew up on a farm. Remember, I can handle a few cows." "It's not your job. My job is whatever needs doing. Right now, That's keeping this place running while you heal. So hush up and let me work." He watched her through the window, trudging through snow to the barn, hauling water, throwing hay. Watched her come back tired but uncomplaining. Ice crystals in her hair and color in her cheeks. Something fierce and protective rose in his chest, a feeling he'd thought buried with Mary. One evening, she sat darning socks by lamplight while he dozed in his chair. The domestic scene struck him with painful sweetness. How many evenings had he imagined just this, a woman's quiet presence? The small sounds of a life shared. "You're staring," Clara said without looking up. "Just thinking." Dangerous habit. Been accused of worse. He shifted in his chair. "Clara, Don't." She set down her darning. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. We have a good arrangement. Let's not complicate it." "Maybe it's already complicated." She did look at him then, and the vulnerability in her eyes made him ache. "I can't afford complicated. Jed, I've got nothing left to give to complicated. I'm not asking for anything." "Aren't you?" She gathered her sewing. "Sometimes the asking isn't in words." She retreated to her room, leaving him with the fire in his thoughts. She was right, of course. Every shared glance, every accidental touch, every moment of quiet understanding, they were all asking for something neither was ready to give. But ready or not, feelings had their own timeline. Like when she trimmed his hair, her fingers gentle against his neck, and he had to close his eyes against the want that flooded through him. Or when he fixed the loose board in her room and found her watching him with something soft in her expression. Or the morning she laughed, really laughed, at something the barn cat did, and the sound hit him like spring after a hard winter. "You should laugh more," he said without thinking. Not much cause for it lately, but she was still smiling. "Maybe that's changing." Her smile faded. "Change isn't always good." "Neither is staying the same when everything inside you is shifting." They stood looking at each other across the kitchen, the moment stretching taut between them. Then Clara turned away, busying herself with the dishes that didn't need washing. That night, Jed lay wakeful. Through the wall, he could hear Clara moving restlessly. Two people, each alone with thoughts that wouldn't settle. The space between their rooms felt both too wide and not wide enough. A week later, full recovered. He returned from checking the stock to find her crying silently at the table, a letter crumpled in her hand. "What's wrong?" He moved without thinking, hand on her shoulder. She wiped her eyes quickly. "Nothing, just my sister wrote. From back east. She had a baby, a little girl." Her voice broke. "I'll never meet her." "Why not?" "Because I'm dead to them. That's the price of leaving a marriage. That's what—" She stood abruptly. "I need to start supper." "Clara." He caught her arm gently. "I'm sorry. For what my choices they're mine to live with. For your losses. All of them." She looked at him for a long moment, then did something that stopped his heart. She stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest. Just for a moment. Just long enough for him to feel her trembling. "So am I," she whispered. He brought his arms up slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he held her, not pulling her closer, not assuming more than this moment of comfort. Her hair smelled of wood smoke and winter air. When she stepped back, they were both breathing unsteady. "I should—" "Yeah. This doesn't—" "I know." But they both knew it did mean something. The careful walls they'd built were showing cracks, letting in drafts of possibility neither had planned for. That evening passed quiet, but the silence held a different quality. Awareness hummed between them like a telegraph wire. When their hands brushed passing the salt, neither pulled away quite as quick. When their eyes met across the table, the look held a second longer. "More coffee?" Clara asked. "Thank you." Such ordinary words for such an extraordinary shift. Because somewhere between that first day and this moment, between the rhythms of daily life and small kindnesses, Between shared losses and careful comfort, something had taken root. Neither would name it. Both would deny it if asked. But like spring stirring beneath winter snow, some things didn't need naming to be real. Some things just were. Inevitable as sunrise, patient as seasons turning. The lonely cowboy had wanted only a quiet ranch cook, but hearts, it seemed, had their own plans. And in the small warmth of a shared kitchen, while winter wrapped the world in white silence, two careful people were learning that sometimes the thing you're not looking for is exactly what you need. The stranger came with the spring thaw, when melting snow turned the road to mud and the first brave wildflowers pushed through dead grass. Clara saw him first from the kitchen window, a lone rider picking his way down the valley trail. Something in the set of his shoulders, the arrogant tilt of his hat, made her hand still on the bread dough. "Jed," she called, voice carefully level. "Someone's coming." He appeared in the doorway, reading her tension immediately. They'd developed that wordless communication over the winter months, each attuned to the other's moods like horses sensing storm. "Know him?" Jed asked, moving to the window. Clara's fingers found the edge of the table, gripping tight. "Yes." One word, but it carried the weight of everything she'd run from. Jed's hand moved instinctively to where his gun belt hung by the door, though he didn't reach for it. Yet. "Want me to send him on his way?" "He's not the type to be sent." She untied her apron with steady hands, though Jed could see the tremor in them. "That's Ethan Blake, my husband." "Former husband," Jed corrected quietly. "The law might disagree." She smoothed her hair, straightened her spine. "I should meet him outside. No need to invite trouble into the house." "You're not meeting him alone." She looked at him then, and something passed between them, gratitude, fear, and something deeper that neither would name. "This isn't your fight, Jed." "Anything that happens on my land is my fight." They stepped onto the porch together as Ethan Blake reined up his horse. He was handsome, in the way that made other men distrust him, too smooth, too polished for honest country. His clothes spoke of city money, his smile of practiced charm that didn't reach his eyes. "Clara." He dismounted with theatrical ease. "You're looking rustic." "Ethan." Her voice could have frosted glass. "You're a long way from Chicago." "A man will travel far for what's his." His gaze slid to Jed, dismissive. "Mr. Carter, I presume I understand you've been caring for my wife." "Mrs. Dawson works as cook and housekeeper," Jed said evenly. "Nothing improper about it." "Mrs. Blake," Ethan corrected. "She seems to have forgotten her proper name, among other things." He stepped closer to the porch. "Come now, Clara, this game has gone on long enough. Time to come home." "This is my home now." "This," he laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "A hovel in the wilderness. You were meant for better things. Remember the house on Lakeshore Drive, the parties, the society friends who ask about you?" "I remember everything," Clara said quietly. "That's why I'm staying here." Ethan's mask slipped for just a moment, showing something ugly underneath. "You always were too proud for your own good. It made disciplining you challenging." Jed stepped forward. "Think it's time you moved along. Mr. Blake." "I'm not leaving without my wife." "The lady says she's staying." "The lady doesn't get a say." Ethan's hand moved to his coat. "I have papers, legal documents. She's my wife in the eyes of God and law, and I have every right." "You have no rights here." Clara's voice cut like a blade. "Show your papers to the wind for all I care." "I'm not going with you." "You struck me." His voice dropped low, dangerous. "With a poker, like some common saloon brawler. Did you tell your employer about that, about your violent nature?" "Defending herself isn't violence." Jed said, "It's survival." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Ah." So she has told you, filled your head with her lies. No doubt. Clara always was good at playing the victim. Gets her sympathy. You see, makes men want to protect her. Maybe men worth protecting her are just rare in your circles. The insult landed. Ethan's face darkened. I could have you arrested for harboring a runaway wife. Alienation of affections. They call it serious charge. Try it, Jed suggested mildly. Sheriff Daniels in Hollow Ridge is an old friend. Fought together at Chancellorsville. He's not much impressed by city lawyers waving papers. This isn't over. Ethan looked at Clara. You think you can just walk away, start fresh like nothing happened. You're mine, Clara. That doesn't change because you found some broken-down soldier to hide behind. Clara moved then, stepping past Jed to the edge of the porch. I was never yours, Ethan. You just thought owning someone was the same as loving them. It's not. And I'd rather die in this hovel than spend another day pretending otherwise. Strong words, but winter's long out here. When the novelty wears off, when you're tired of playing frontier wife, you'll come crawling back, and maybe I'll be generous enough to take you. The lady asked you to leave. Jed said, now I'm telling you, get on your horse and ride out. Don't come back. Or what you'll shoot me very civilized. But Ethan was already backing toward his horse. This isn't Chicago, friend. Out here, papers might not matter, but bullets do, and I've got 6 men waiting in Hollow Ridge. Business associates who understand the value of retrieving lost property. He mounted with less grace than before, yanking his horse's head around roughly. Think about it, Clara. Your little rebellion has been amusing, but it's time to come home. I'll be at the Imperial Hotel for 3 days. After that, he smiled, cold as winter moon. Well, accidents happen on these remote ranches. Fires, stampedes, all sorts of tragedies. They watched him ride away, standing silent until he disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Clara sag against the porch rail. 6 men, she said quietly. He always did like an audience for his cruelties. Might be bluffing. Might not be. She looked at him with haunted eyes. I should leave. Tonight, before... No. Jed, you don't understand. He doesn't make idle threats. Those men in town are probably hired guns who'll disappear the minute the money dries up. He touched her shoulder carefully. This is your home now. You said so yourself. I had no right to bring this trouble to your door. You didn't bring it. He did. Jed studied her face. But there's more to this than him wanting a wife back. What aren't you telling me? Clara wrapped her arms around herself. My father left me money. Not much by Chicago standards, but enough. It was supposed to be mine alone, protected by law from any husband, but Ethan found ways around that. Forgeries, threats to the lawyer. He spent most of it on bad investments and good whiskey. Most. I managed to hide some, enough to get away, pay the agency, start over. She laughed bitterly. He probably spent more tracking me down than what I have left. But it's not about the money anymore. It's about winning, about proving I can't escape. He doesn't know you very well. He knows me too well, knows I won't let anyone else pay for my choices. She straightened. I'll pack tonight, head north maybe, or... Clara. He waited until she looked at him. You're not running, not this time. You can't fight my battles. Watch me. Something flared in her eyes, anger, fear, or maybe hope. Why? Why do you care what happens to me? The question hung between them, heavy with all the unspoken truths of winter evenings by the fire, of shared silences and careful kindnesses. Jed could have deflected, made it about justice or protecting those on his land. Instead, he told the truth. Because seeing you leave would break something in me I just finished mending. Her breath caught. Jed? I know. You're not looking for complications. Neither was I. But here we are. He stepped back, giving her space. Stay. We'll face whatever comes together. That's not a declaration or a demand. It's just sense. You running helps nobody but him. She studied his face for a long moment. You don't know what you're risking. I've risked more for worse reasons. At least this time it's for something worthwhile. I'm not worth. You are. He said it simple, certain. Now come inside. Supper won't cook itself, and we need to think about what comes next. They went in together, but the house felt different now. The shadows seemed darker, the windows more vulnerable. As Clara worked at the stove, Jed checked his rifle, counted ammunition, mentally cataloged defensible positions. Old soldier habits died hard. I could wire Fort Benton, he said. Have some army friends who might. No. She set plates on the table with careful precision. This is my mess. I won't drag more good people into it. Too late for that. She almost smiled. Stubborn man. Pot calling the kettle black. They ate quietly, both lost in thought. Outside. Darkness gathered like a promise of troubles to come, but inside, lamplight held it at bay, creating a small circle of warmth and safety that felt both precious and fragile. He'll try to turn the town against us, Clara said finally. Money talks loud in small places. Let him try. I've got history here. That counts for something. And if he brings those men to the ranch? Then they'll learn why I survived the war when better men didn't. He saw her flinch and softened his tone. It won't come to that. Men like your husband prefer to win without getting their hands dirty. You don't know him like I do. No, but I know his type. Bullies wrapped in money and manners. They're dangerous, but they're not unbeatable. She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. I don't want you hurt because of me. He turned his palm up, linked their fingers. And I don't want you running because of him. Guess we're both stuck. The touch lasted longer than it should have. Said more than words could. When she pulled away, they both felt the loss of it. That night, Jed moved his bedroll to the main room where he could watch the door. Clara didn't protest. They both knew the real danger might not come tonight or even tomorrow, but it would come. Ethan Blake hadn't traveled all this way to leave empty-handed. Through the thin wall, Jed heard Clara moving restlessly. He wanted to tell her it would be all right, that he'd keep her safe. But promises were dangerous things, easily broken by bullets or law. Instead, he kept watch and made plans. A soldier preparing for battle he'd hoped never to fight again. Tomorrow he'd ride to town, talk to Sheriff Daniels, gauge the threat. Tonight, though, he'd guard what mattered, and if pushed to examine why Clara Dawson mattered so much after such a short time. Well, the heart had its own reasons, and they rarely made sense to the head. The lonely cowboy had wanted only quiet. Instead, he'd found something worth fighting for. Whether that was foolish or fate didn't matter now. The choice was made. The drought came like a thief in the night, stealing moisture from the air and hope from the land. By late June, the grass had turned brittle as old paper, and the creek that fed Jed's ranch had dwindled to a muddy trickle. I never seen it this bad, Samuel Morrison said, weighing out flour in his general store. Not since '73. Lost half the county's cattle that year. Jed studied the prices chalked on the board. Everything up. Credit tightening like a noose. How many others are pulling their herds north? Thompson's already gone. Baxter's talking about it. Morrison lowered his voice. Course, some folks got other troubles besides weather. Through the window, Jed could see the Imperial Hotel where Ethan Blake had set up court like some displaced king. 2 weeks he'd been in town, spreading money and poison in equal measure. Man's been asking questions, Morrison continued. About you, about Mrs. Dawson. She's Mrs. Dawson, not Mrs. Blake. Remember that. I do, but gold has a way of affecting memory. The shopkeeper glanced around nervously. He's hired the Garrett brothers, them and 3 others, rough sorts. Jed had seen them gun hands lounging outside the saloon, watching everyone with predator eyes, waiting for orders or opportunity. Thanks for the warning, Sam. Jed. Morrison hesitated. Nobody'd blame you for sending her on. Woman brings that kind of trouble. The only trouble she brought was cooking decent food for once. Jed gathered his purchases. The rest followed on its own. He loaded the wagon, aware of eyes watching from the hotel. Let them look. He'd faced worse than hired guns with neat clothes and tied-down holsters. The ride back seemed longer in the heat, dust devils dancing across the barren landscape. When he crested the final hill, his heart sank. The small garden Clara had coaxed to life was wilting, and several cattle stood listlessly near the empty water trough. Clara emerged from the barn, hair damp with sweat, hauling 2 buckets from the pitiful remains of the creek. She'd hiked her skirts up for easier movement, and her arms showed the strain of work too heavy for her frame. "Let me," Jed said, jumping from the wagon. "I can manage." But she let him take the buckets, following as he poured the precious water for the livestock. "The creek's all but done. Maybe 3 more days' worth if we're careful." "I know. We'll need to move the herd to Miller's Creek. It's a 2-day drive, but the water's still good there. Through Garrett land." He nodded grimly. The Garrett brothers' ranch sat square between his property and the nearest reliable water. They'd never been friendly neighbors. And now, with Blake's money backing them. "There's another way," Clara said quietly. "I could leave. Draw them off. You could save your ranch without—" "We've had this conversation. Answer hasn't changed." "But your cattle. We'll survive or not. Either way, you're staying." He softened his tone. "Unless you want to go. That's different." She looked away, toward the mountains, shimmering in the heat. "You know I don't want to leave." "Then it's settled." That evening, they made plans by lamplight, maps spread on the table, marking water sources, possible routes, defensible positions if trouble came. "We'll need supplies," Clara said, all business now. "Food for the drive, medical goods in case—" She didn't finish. "Can you handle a pistol?" "Ethan made sure I learned. Said a lady should be able to protect her jewelry." Her smile held no humor. "He never figured I'd use the lessons to protect myself instead." Jed pulled his navy coat from the drawer, checked the action, and slid it across to her. "Keep this close, just in case." She picked it up with familiarity, checking the chambers. "You're expecting trouble." "I'm preparing for it. Different thing." "Is it?" She set the gun down carefully. "Sometimes I think we're just delaying the inevitable. He won't stop, Jed. Not until he wins, or he learns the cost is too high. Men like Blake are used to buying what they want. When the price gets steep enough, they find easier targets. You don't know him." "I know enough." They worked late into the night, preparing. Clara baked hardtack and dried meat, packed medical supplies with the careful efficiency of someone who'd seen violence before. Jed cleaned weapons, checked tech, mentally ran through scenarios and contingencies. Near midnight, heat lightning flickered on the horizon, promising storms that wouldn't come. They sat on the porch, watching nature's empty threats. "My father would have liked you," Clara said suddenly. "He valued steady men." "Not sure I'm steady, just stubborn." "Same thing sometimes." She pulled her shawl closer despite the heat. "He died trying to save our milk cows from a barn fire. Neighbors said he was foolish, risking his life for animals, but he knew we'd starve without them. Sounds like a man who understood what mattered. Ethan called him a fool, said smart men make others do the dying." She looked at Jed. "Is that what you're doing, dying for someone else's fight?" "Nobody's dying if I can help it." He met her gaze. "And it stopped being just your fight the minute you made biscuits that didn't break my teeth." Despite everything, she laughed, a soft sound that seemed to surprise her. "That's your standard edible biscuits. Man's gotta have standards. And a woman, what standards should she have? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Jed considered his words carefully. Maybe finding someone who sees her worth beyond what she can do or what she owns. Someone who'd faced drought and hired guns just to keep her safe. That's a high standard. You're worth high standards. She stood abruptly. We should rest. Tomorrow will be hard enough. But she paused at the door, looking back. Jed, thank you for all of it. Nothing to thank me for yet. Yes, she said softly. There is. The next morning dawned blood-red through the dust. They worked without words, each knowing their tasks. Clara secured the house while Jed prepared the horses. The cattle, sensing change, milled restlessly in the corral. They were loading the last supplies when riders appeared on the ridge. 6 men, spreading out in a half-circle. The Garrett brothers rode center, flanked by hired guns whose faces meant nothing but trouble. Morning, Carter, Tom Garrett called out, not bothering to dismount. Heard you're planning to move your herd. Drought's driving everyone to water, Jed replied evenly. No crime in that. No, but trespassing is. You'll need to cross our land to reach Miller's Creek. Been an understood rite of passage for 10 years. Things change. Tom's smile was all teeth. Mister, Blake's helped us see the value of our property. Can't have folks crossing without compensation. How much? More than you've got. But, mister, Blake's a generous man, willing to forget all debts in exchange for one thing. His eyes slid to Clara. What's not yours to keep? Clara stepped out from behind the wagon, the borrowed colt visible at her hip. I'm not property to be bartered. Mr. Garrett. Law says different. Ma'am, you took vows, made promises. To a man who broke his first. Her voice carried clear in the morning air. Any contract based on lies is no contract at all. Pretty words, but out here, might makes right. Tom's hand drifted toward his gun. 6 against 2. 3 if you count that old scattergun behind the door. Not good odds. Numbers aren't everything, Jed observed. You boys are hired help. Fighting for money. We're fighting for home. Makes a difference when lead starts flying. Maybe, but your cattle still need water, and we control the path. Tom leaned forward in his saddle. Here's the deal. The woman comes with us. Peaceful-like. You keep your ranch, your cattle, your life. Everyone wins. Everyone except her. Not your concern. She's another man's wife. She's under my protection. Your protection, Will Garrett laughed. You couldn't protect your first family. What makes you think this time's different? The words hit like physical blows. Jed's hand tightened on his rifle, but Clara moved faster. She stepped fully into view, shoulders back, chin raised. You want to know the difference? Her voice rang with strength. Mary Carter died of fever, taken by God or fate or cruel chance. But I'm standing here by choice, my choice, and unlike her, I can shoot back. Brave talk for a woman hiding behind a broken-down soldier. I'm not hiding. She drew the colt smooth as silk. I'm choosing my ground. There's a difference. Tension stretched taut as fence wire. Hands hovered near weapons. Horses shifted nervously, sensing their rider's mood. This isn't over, Tom finally said. You'll need water eventually, and we'll be waiting. Then we'd best not keep you. Jed's voice held winter cold. Get off my land. They wheeled their horses, but Tom looked back. 3 days. Carter. That's how long your creek's got. After that, you come begging or come shooting. Makes no difference to us. They rode off in a cloud of dust and threats. Clara lowered the colt with steady hands, but Jed saw the tremor after. Well, she said with forced lightness. That went well. Could have gone worse. It will, next time. She holstered the gun with practiced ease. We can't fight them all. Jed, not if they come in force. Maybe not, but we can make it cost them, dear. He studied the horizon where dust still hung. Question is whether Blake's willing to pay that price for pride. They stood together in the barnyard, surrounded by thirsty cattle and dying grass. The sensible thing would be to give up, let her go, save the ranch, survive to fight another day. But looking at Clara, fierce and frightened and magnificent in her determination, Jed knew sensible had stopped mattering sometime during the winter. What mattered was the woman beside him who'd brought life back to his dead heart. What mattered was keeping faith with someone who'd chosen to stand rather than run. "Come on," he said finally. "Let's see how much water we can haul before the creek gives out. Maybe buy us time to think of something clever." Since when are cowboys clever? Since they started hiring cooks who shoot back. She smiled then, real warmth breaking through worry. "I'm still a better cook than gunfighter." "Good thing. I'd hate to survive a shootout just to die of your biscuits." They worked through the killing heat, hauling water bucket by bucket, fighting for every day they could steal from the drought. Both knew it couldn't last. The creek would fail, the cattle would thirst, and choices would narrow to none. But for now, they worked side by side, two people standing against the world's dry judgment, and if their hands touched more than necessary, if their glances held promises too dangerous to speak, well, the drought would take what it wanted soon enough. Tomorrow could bring gunfire or salvation. Today brought only work and will and the strange comfort of facing doom together. In a land that killed the weak and broke the strong, sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. The storm broke on the third night, but it brought no relief, only lightning that split the sky and thunder that shook the walls. No rain, just nature's mockery of their thirst. Clara stood at the window, watching electric light illuminate the landscape in stuttering glimpses. "He's coming tonight." Jed didn't ask how she knew. Some knowledge lived in the bones, learned through pain. "You sure?" "The storm's perfect cover. Ethan always did like drama." She turned from the window. "I won't let you die for my past, Jed, and I won't let you face it alone." They'd prepared as best they could. Water barrels filled from the dying creek, ammunition laid out, windows barricaded. But 6 men with bad intentions could overwhelm 2 defenders, and they both knew it. "There's still time," Clara said. "You could ride to town, stay with Morrison. We've been over this." "No, we've danced around it." Lightning flashed, showing her face stark with determination. "You think you owe me something because I remind you of what you lost. But I'm not Mary, Jed. Saving me won't bring her back." The words cut deep because they held truth, but not all of it. "You're right. You're not Mary." He crossed to her, close enough to see the pulse beating at her throat. "Mary was sunshine and easy laughter. You're steel and storm clouds, and maybe that's what I need now, someone who fights back instead of fading away." "Jed, let me finish. I failed my wife and son. Can't change that. But I'll be damned if I fail you too. Not because you remind me of her, because you reminded me I'm still alive." Thunder crashed, drowning whatever she might have said. When it faded, hoofbeats carried on the wind. "They're here," Clara whispered. Through the rain-lashed darkness, shapes moved. More than 6 Ethan had brought reinforcements. They spread out, surrounding the house with practiced efficiency. "Carter," Ethan's voice carried clear despite the storm. "Let's be civilized about this. Send her out, and we ride away. Nobody has to bleed tonight." Jed checked his rifle. "Man who threatens women isn't civilized, just dressed up pretty." Big words from a failed soldier playing house with another man's wife. "I'm nobody's wife," Clara shouted. "I left that title in Chicago with my bruises and broken ribs." "Details, darling. Legal details." Ethan's shadow moved closer to the porch. "Did you really think you could run forever? Did you think this broken-down rancher could protect you? He's done better in 6 months than you did in 3 years." "Has he now?" Ethan's laugh was ugly. "Tell me, Carter as she shared your bed, yet she's quite talented when properly motivated. Jed felt Clara tense beside him. Don't let him bait you, she murmured. That's what he wants. But Ethan wasn't finished. Or maybe she's playing you like she played me. Poor widow act. So brave, so vulnerable. Makes a man want to save her, until you realize she's the one holding the knife. Only knife I ever held was to defend myself, Clara called back. Something you'd know if you'd ever fought fair in your life. Lightning revealed the scene, men positioned at every corner, guns drawn, waiting. The Garrett brothers flanked Ethan, water dripping from their hat brims. Last chance, Tom Garrett added. We've got no quarrel with you, Carter, just business. Funny how your business always involves threatening folks who can't fight back, Jed observed. Your daddy would be ashamed. My daddy's dead, mister. Blake pays better than pride. Everything has a price, Ethan agreed. Even stubborn cowboys. Boys burn the barn. Let's see how noble he is watching his livelihood go up in smoke. No, Clara started for the door, but Jed caught her arm. That's what he wants. You go out there. We've lost. Through the window, they watched torches flare to life despite the rain. The barn, full of winter hay and what little grain they'd saved, would burn fast once lit. I can't let you lose everything, Clara said desperately. Not for me. Already lost everything once. Survived it? He met her eyes. Won't survive losing you. Time slowed. Thunder crashed. Men moved toward the barn with fire, and Clara made her choice. She kissed him, not gentle, not careful, a kiss like lightning, bright and burning and gone too fast. I love you, she said against his mouth. Remember that. Before he could respond, she was moving, out the door into the storm, the Colt in her hand. Ethan Blake, her voice carried over thunder. You want me, face me yourself, or are you still the coward who only fights when his opponent can't hit back? Everything stopped. Even the storm seemed to pause. Ethan stepped into the flickering torchlight. Dramatic as always, darling, but you know you can't shoot me. You don't have it in you. Don't I? She raised the gun steady. You taught me well. Remember, ladies should be able to protect themselves. You said, never thought I'd need protecting from you. You won't shoot. You're not a killer, Clara. Neither was I a runner. Things change. Lightning flashed, showing her face carved from stone and sorrow. Call off your men. This is between us. Clara, no! Jed burst from the house, rifle ready. Stay back. She didn't look at him, keeping her eyes locked on Ethan. This is my fight, my past, my choice. Touching, Ethan sneered. The lady makes her stand, but you're forgetting something. Darling, I don't fight fair. He moved fast, drawing as he dodged left, but Clara moved faster, steadier. The Colt spoke once, voice lost in thunder. Ethan's gun spun from his hand as he clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. The next one goes center mass. Clara said calmly, I'm done running, done hiding, done pretending you have any power over me. You shot me. Ethan's voice rose to a shriek. You actually shot me. You gave me no choice, just like before. She kept the gun trained on him. Gentlemen, she addressed the hired guns. Your employer is wounded, and this job just got complicated. Sure, you want to die for a man who won't even face a woman fairly. The Garrett brothers exchanged glances. Nobody said anything about killing women, Will muttered. Smart men. Jed had moved to Clara's shoulder, rifle covering the group. Take him and go. Tell folks what happened here, how Ethan Blake got shot by the woman he tried to own. See how his reputation survives that. You'll pay for this. Ethan gasped, still clutching his shoulder. Both of you. I'll see you hanged. You'll see Chicago doctors if you're smart. Clara interrupted. That shoulder needs tending before it festers. Your choice, revenge or survival. Tom Garrett made the decision. "Load him up, boys. We're done here." They lifted Ethan, protesting and cursing, onto his horse. As they prepared to leave, Tom looked back. "The water rights stand. Carter, can't have folks thinking we've gone soft." "Understood," Jed replied. "But we'll manage. Always have." They watched the riders disappear into the storm, Ethan's curses fading with distance. Only when they were gone did Clara lower the gun, her hands finally shaking. "You could have killed him," Jed said quietly. "I could have." "Almost did." She turned to him, rain mixing with tears on her face. "Would you think less of me if I had?" "No, but you'd think less of yourself, and that matters more." She laughed, sharp and broken. "You matter more. This ranch matters more. I nearly—" He pulled her close, cutting off words with action. She folded into him, gun still dangling from one hand, both of them soaked and shaking with released tension. "We matter," he corrected. "Together. That's the only thing worth fighting for." They stood in the storm, holding each other while lightning painted the world in stark relief. The barn still stood. The house remained whole. They'd survived. "Think he'll come back?" Clara asked against his chest. "No, men like that can't stand being humiliated. He'll find another target, someone who won't shoot back." "I really do love you," she said, in case the moment got lost in gunfire. "Didn't get lost, just delayed." He pulled back to see her face. "I love you too. Have for months. Probably. Just too stubborn to admit it." "Stubborn man. Dangerous woman. We make a good pair." Lightning flashed again, showing her smile tired but real. "Let's go inside before we drown. And Jed, we still need to figure out water for the cattle." "Tomorrow's problem," he said. "Tonight, we're alive and together. That's enough." They went inside, leaving the storm to wash away the blood and fear. In the morning, they'd face drought and debts and all the hardships of ranch life. But tonight, in the circle of lamplight, with her hand in his and future spreading before them, uncertain but shared, they had everything that mattered. The lonely cowboy had wanted only quiet. He'd found instead a woman who'd stand in a storm and face down the past with steady hands, who'd choose love over safety, fight over flight. "Clara," he said as she checked the windows one last time, "thank you for staying, for fighting, for shooting your troubles away." She smiled over her shoulder. "All part of the service, though it does cost extra. Bill me." "Oh, I intend to, every day for the rest of our lives." The promise in those words warmed better than any fire. Outside, the storm began to break, and somewhere in the distance, they could swear they heard the sound of rain finally starting to fall. Maybe prayers were answered after all, just not always in the ways expected. And sometimes, the best gifts came wrapped in gun smoke and hard choices, delivered by women brave enough to stop running and men stubborn enough to stand their ground. The drought would break. Ethan wouldn't return. And two hearts that had been silent too long had finally found their voice not in words of poetry or passion, but in the simple declaration of choosing each other against all odds. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The rain that started during the confrontation with Ethan continued through the night, turning dust to mud and filling the creek with precious water. By morning, the land looked different, not healed, but hopeful. Jed woke to find Clara already up, standing at the window watching puddles form in the yard. She'd wrapped herself in a quilt, hair loose around her shoulders, in the gray dawn light. She looked younger, softer, the armor of constant vigilance temporarily set aside. "Can't sleep?" he asked from the doorway. "Too much quiet. Kept waiting for—" She shrugged. "Old habits." He understood. After violence, peace felt fragile as spring ice. He crossed to stand beside her, not touching but close enough to feel her warmth. "The creek's running," She said, "Cattle won't die of thirst today." No, we bought ourselves time. For what? She turned to face him. Ethan's gone, but the problems remain. The Garretts still control the water route. The ranch is barely surviving. And I'm... You're what? Still married in the eyes of the law? Still a woman who shot her husband? She pulled the quilt tighter. That's not something folks forget. Let them remember. You defended yourself. Nobody with sense would fault you for it. Since when does sense govern what people think? But she smiled slightly. You're an optimist. Jed Carter. Just stubborn. There's a difference. Is there? She reached out, touched the scar on his jaw. What makes a man keep fighting when surrender would be easier? Same thing that makes a woman face down her past with a loaded gun. He caught her hand, held it. We're both too contrary to quit. Contrary, she tested the word. Mary used to call me that. Said I'd argue with a fence post if it looked at me wrong. Smart woman, though I prefer determined. Stubborn and determined. Quite a pair. She left her hand in his, thumb tracing patterns on his palm. Jed last night. What I said. Which part the shooting, the standing in the rain, or the declaration? You know which part. I do. Question is whether you meant it or if it was just storm talking. She met his eyes directly. I've never said those words when I didn't mean them. Not even to Ethan. Not even when he demanded them. They're not currency to be spent carelessly. Good, because I meant mine too. He drew her closer. Question is what we do about it. What do you want to do? This. He kissed her properly this time, without gunfire or storm to interrupt. She melted into him, quilt falling forgotten as her arms came around his neck, when they finally broke apart. Both were breathless. That's a start, she murmured. Just a start. He kissed her again, deeper, feeling her respond with equal fervor. How about now? Getting warmer, but she pulled back, hands on his chest. Jed, we should talk about expectations. I expect you to keep cooking. Beyond that, we'll figure it out as we go. It's not that simple. I'm still legally bound to another man. The scandal will blow over. Everything does, given time. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Clara, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm just asking you to stay. To let whatever this is between us grow without forcing it into shapes it's not ready for. And if it grows into something that needs those shapes, then we'll handle it, together. He smiled. Besides, you already shot him. Divorce seems tame by comparison. Despite everything, she laughed. Practical romance. Very cowboy. Would you prefer poetry? I might remember some Byron from school. Lord, no. I've had enough of pretty words that mean nothing. She kissed him quick and light. I'll take honest over eloquent any day. Then, honestly, I'm hungry, and you're distracting me from breakfast. Romantic and practical, but she was smiling as she dressed and headed to the kitchen. They settled into a new rhythm over the following days. The work remained harder with the Garretts blocking their easiest routes, but shared burden felt lighter. They touched more freely now, small gestures that spoke volumes. Her hand on his shoulder as she served coffee, his fingers brushing her waist as he passed. The casual intimacy of two people learning each other's geography. We need supplies, Clara announced after checking the pantry. And news. The town must be buzzing about what happened. I'll go this afternoon. We'll go. At his look, she added. I won't hide. That gives them power. Besides, I need fabric. My dress is more patches than original cloth. Clara, folks might not be welcoming. Shooting a man, even in self-defense. Let them whisper. I have survived worse than gossip. So they went together, riding through mud and standing water, the land drinking deep after months of thirst. Town looked different, somehow smaller, less threatening without Ethan's presence looming from the hotel. Morrison greeted them with obvious relief. Heard there was some excitement at your place. Some, Jed agreed. How much you hear? Enough. Garrett boys came through with Blake, heading for the train. Man was cursing something fierce about ungrateful women and lucky shots. The shopkeeper glanced at Clara. Pardon the language, ma'am. I've heard worse from him, usually. Clara moved through the store with her usual efficiency, but Jed noticed the tension in her shoulders. Folks are talking. Morrison continued quietly. Some saying you had no choice, others... He shrugged. Well, you know how people are. I do. Clara set her selections on the counter. Which is why I'm here, visible and unashamed. Let them see I'm not running. Brave stance. Or foolish, time will tell. She selected fabric with care, practical colors. Nothing fancy. Mr. Morrison, I need to know, will my situation affect your willingness to extend credit? Ma'am, you're the first person to ask straight out instead of dancing around it. He smiled. Far as I'm concerned, you're a customer in good standing. What happened between you and Blake is your business. Thank you. Real warmth in her voice. That means more than you know. They were loading supplies when Sheriff Daniels approached. Jed tensed, but the lawman's expression was thoughtful rather than threatening. Carter, Mrs. Dawson. He touched his hat. Need to ask about the other night. Ask, Jed said. Blake filed charges before he left. Not formally. Hard to explain getting shot by a woman he claims can't take care of herself. Daniels studied Clara. You did shoot him. I did. No hesitation. He drew on me. I was faster. Witnesses. 6 hired guns who saw their employer pull a weapon on an armed woman defending her home. Jed kept his voice level. Don't think they'll testify to his character. Probably not. The sheriff rubbed his jaw. Here's the thing. Law says a woman belongs with her husband. But law also says a person has right to self-defense. Gets complicated when those two things collide. Only if you let it. Clara said, I left him. He followed. He threatened violence. I responded. Seems simple to me. Ma'am, with respect, you're not the one who has to keep peace in this town. No, but I'm the one who has to live with the consequences of whatever you decide. She met his gaze steadily. So, what will it be? Sheriff, am I under arrest? Daniels sighed. No, Blake didn't file charges. You acted in defense. And frankly, I'm glad to see the back of him. But ma'am, this kind of situation has a way of festering. Might be wise to formalize things, legal-like. Divorce, you mean? Among other things. His eyes flicked between them. Just friendly advice. After he left, they finished loading in silence. It wasn't until they were heading home that Clara spoke. He's right about formalizing things. Maybe, but that's tomorrow's worry. You keep saying that. Tomorrow's worry, tomorrow's problem. She looked at him. What about today? Today we're together. Today the ranch has water. Today you're free of him, whether the law recognizes it or not. He reached over, took her hand. Today's pretty good, all things considered. When did you become a philosopher? About the time a sharp-tongued cook started shooting my problems away. That evening, as Clara prepared dinner, Jed found himself watching her with new eyes, not just as the woman who'd saved his ranch from emptiness, but as the partner who'd stood beside him against threat, who'd chosen him, chose this life, despite easier options. You're staring again, she said without turning. Just thinking. About how that first day, I thought I was getting a quiet cook. Lonely cowboy wanted only a quiet ranch cook. He quoted the words he'd thought so often. Got somewhat more than I bargained for. She did turn then, spoon in hand. Regrets. Not a one. Well, maybe about your first batch of biscuits. Those were perfectly acceptable biscuits. If you were building a house, maybe. She flicked water at him from the wash basin. Ungrateful man. He caught her hand, pulling her close. Grateful for everything. Even the biscuits. Just the biscuits. Her eyes danced. Well, the coffee's improved too. She swatted him with a dish rag, but she was laughing. Romance is truly dead. No, he said, suddenly serious. It's not. It's right here, in this kitchen, wearing a patched dress and flour in her hair. Jed! I know we can't marry proper yet. No, there's complications. But Clara, far as I'm concerned, you're already my wife in every way that matters. Tears gathered in her eyes. You can't know what that means to hear. Then let me show you. He kissed her with all the promise of tomorrows they'd build together. All the faith that love could overcome law and gossip and drought. When they broke apart, both knew something fundamental had shifted. Stay with me tonight, he said quietly. Not because we have to prove anything or claim anything, just because I want to hold you without walls between us. Yes, she whispered. Simple as that. Yes. Later, lying together in the narrow bed that had held too many lonely nights, Jed traced patterns on Clara's bare shoulder. No regrets, he asked. Not one. She turned in his arms. This is home, Jed. You're home. Everything else is just paperwork. Romantic and practical, he teased. Very, Clara. Would you have me any other way? Not for all the quiet cooks in Montana. She kissed him then, and talking became unnecessary. Outside, gentle rain continued to fall, filling the creek, nurturing the land. Inside, two hearts that had been silent too long found new rhythms, new reasons to beat. The lonely cowboy had wanted only quiet. He'd found instead a love worth fighting for, a woman worth changing for, a life worth living fully. And if that life came with complications, legal troubles, water rights, gossip, and the occasional gunfight, well, nothing worthwhile came easy. In the circle of lamplight, with rain pattering on the roof and Clara warm in his arms, Jed Carter knew peace, not the empty peace of solitude, but the full peace of finding where you belong. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight brought its own gifts. And for once, tomorrow could wait. Spring arrived like a blessing, painting the valley with wildflowers and filling the air with promise. The creek ran strong from winter snowmelt, and the grass grew thick enough to hide a man's boots. 6 months had passed since Ethan Blake rode away bleeding, and life had settled into rhythms both new and necessary. Clara stood in the garden she'd coaxed from stubborn soil, hands deep in earth, planting seeds with the faith of someone who'd learned to trust in tomorrows. The morning sun caught the simple gold band on her finger, not a legal wedding ring yet, but a promise made real in private ceremony with only the mountains as witness. Tomatoes here, she murmured to herself. Beans along the fence where they can climb. Planning to feed an army? Jed asked from behind her. She smiled without turning. Just planning. Never thought I'd have reason to plant things and watch them grow. He knelt beside her, adding his hands to the work. They'd learned this rhythm too, working side by side. Comfortable in shared silence or easy conversation. Letter came, he said after a while. From that lawyer in Denver. Clara's hand stilled, and divorce was granted, abandonment, and other grounds. You're legally free. She sat back on her heels, dirt-covered hands trembling slightly. Free? Such a small word for such a large thing. Means we can make this official, if you want. He touched the ring on her finger. Do it proper, with papers and witnesses. Is that what you want? I want you. Legal or not, papers or not, but I figure you deserve the choice. She looked at him then, this man who'd given her sanctuary when she needed it, partnership when she was ready for it, love when she thought she'd never trust it again. Yes, I want the papers. Want the whole town to know I'm Clara Carter by choice. Sure might hurt business at the ranch, having a scandalous woman attached to it. Jed Carter, if you think I survived Ethan Blake just to worry about what Hollow Ridge society thinks. She threw a handful of dirt at him, laughing. He caught her muddy hands, pulled her close despite the soil. That's my Clara. Fighter to the end. You're Clara. She tested the words. I like the sound of that. Good, because I'm not giving you back. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in town. Nothing fancy. Clara wore a new dress she'd sewn herself, simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Jed had trimmed his beard and bought a new shirt that Clara hadn't had to mend yet. Morrison stood as witness, along with his wife Martha, who'd decided Clara was exactly what Jed needed. Scandal or no scandal. Do you, Clara Dawson, take this man? Reverend Mills asked, his voice carrying in the small space. I do, clear and certain, no hesitation. Do you, Jedediah Carter? I do, before the question was even finished, making Clara smile. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and the grace of God, I pronounce you man and wife. When Jed kissed her, someone in the back whooped, probably one of the ranch hands who'd come to see their boss finally smile regular-like. Clara laughed against his mouth, and he thought he'd never heard a finer sound in any church. The reception was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard, neighbors coming by with covered dishes and cautious congratulations. Not everyone approved. There were still whispers about the woman who'd shot her husband, but enough did to make it feel like community. I never thought I'd see Jed Carter dancing, Sheriff Daniels observed, watching them move slowly to fiddle music. Never thought I'd be dancing, Jed admitted, but he held Clara close and managed not to step on her feet too often. As evening painted the sky purple and gold, they stood together watching their guests. The Garrett brothers hadn't come, but they'd sent word that water passage could be negotiated fair-like, man to man. Progress of sorts. Happy? Jed asked. More than I have words for. Clara leaned into him. You. Same. He was quiet a moment. Keep thinking about that advertisement. Lonely Cowboy wanted only a quiet ranch cook. Your quiet ranch cook turned out to be considerable trouble. Best trouble I ever found. He kissed her temple. Though you never did master those biscuits. Jedediah Carter, on our wedding day. You're right, your coffee's worse than your biscuits. She turned in his arms, mock outrage on her face. I should shoot you too. Probably, but then who'd run the ranch? I would, probably better than you do. Probably true. He pulled her close again. Good thing we're partners then. As night fell and guests departed, they stood in their doorway watching stars emerge. The house behind them glowed with lamplight and warmth, no longer empty but full of possibility. Come to bed, wife, Jed said, the title still new and wonderful on his tongue. In a moment, husband. She was looking at the garden, at the green shoots reaching skyward. Just thinking how far we've come, both of us. Long way from that scared woman stepping off the stage. Longer way from that silent man waiting for her. She turned to him. We saved each other, didn't we? Maybe, or maybe we just recognized home when we found it. She kissed him then, soft and sure. Same thing, perhaps. Inside, their bedroom waited. No longer two people maintaining careful distance, but two hearts beating in rhythm. The night sounds of the ranch surrounded them, cattle lowing, horses shuffling, the eternal wind through grass. But inside was warmth and safety, and the promise of all the tomorrows they'd build together. What are you thinking? Clara asked, tracing patterns on his chest in the darkness. About planting. Maybe we should expand that garden. Maybe add some fruit trees. Make it proper. Planning for the future. Mr. Carter. Planning for permanence, Mrs. Carter. He captured her hand. This is home now. Real home, not just a place to wait between losses. "Yes," she whispered. "Home." Come morning, they'd face the eternal challenges of ranch life. Cattle to tend, fences to mend, weather to fight, bills to pay. The Garrett brothers might make trouble. Drought might come again. Life had no guarantees except change and challenge. But they'd face it together. A lonely cowboy who'd wanted only quiet, and a woman who'd stirred more than his silent desires. She'd stirred his life back into motion, given him reason to plant trees and plan futures and believe in the possibility of happiness after sorrow. The sun rose on a new day, painting the mountains gold and setting the dew to sparkling. In the kitchen, Clara hummed as she made coffee still too strong, but Jed had developed a taste for it. He watched from the doorway, marveling at how one person could transform empty space into home. "Stop staring and help with breakfast," she called without turning. "We've got a ranch to run." "Yes, ma'am." But he stayed a moment longer, memorizing the seen sunlight through clean windows, the woman he loved moving with purpose through their shared space, the garden visible through the door already reaching for sky. The lonely cowboy had wanted only a quiet ranch cook. Instead, he'd found Clara fierce and tender, practical and passionate, everything he hadn't known he needed. She'd come and stirred his silent desires. Yes, but more than that, she'd stirred his life back into living. And in a land that killed the weak and tested the strong, sometimes finding someone to stand beside you was the greatest victory of all. Sometimes love wasn't about poetry or perfection. Sometimes it was about two people choosing each other despite the odds, building something lasting from the ashes of what came before. The coffee was too strong. The biscuits were still questionable. But the life they were building together, that was just right. In the garden, new seeds pushed through dark soil, reaching for light. On the porch, 2 coffee cups sat side by side, steam rising in the morning air. And in the vast Montana sky, the sun climbed higher, blessing the small ranch where loneliness had given way to love. Silence had given way to laughter, and 2 broken hearts had found their way to whole. Thank you all for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Clara and Jed's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, partners.